I'm walking around the downtown where I live, and I'm gonna see if I can find an approachable person and just ask him a quick question. Hey, can I ask you a quick question? Do you know what Tourette's is, or Tourette Syndrome?
Isn't that disease where you curse?
My name's Ben, and when I was a little kid, I was diagnosed with that disease where you curse. Except that doesn't really well describe my experience with Tourette Syndrome. My tics are a little less conspicuous. Even so, I tic probably hundreds or 1,000 times a day altogether, honestly, because I have a variety of tics. Some of those tics are virtually invisible. Like, for example, I'll tense my arms or my stomach or hold my breath. That happens all the time. And then some tics are totally visible or audible, like widening my eyes like I just saw something surprising, or odd little vocalizations, or just sounds I make. It all fluctuates. There are some tics I had 5 years ago that, I don't know, they just went away. But for every tic I lost, there was always a new one to take its place. Anyway, that's just my little baseball card description of my Tourette's. But here's the thing. In my adult life, I've totally kept this a secret. I've just hidden the fact that I have Tourette's in a lamely worried kind of way. Even though when I was a kid, I was in the newspaper for having it, for having Tourette's. I was even on the front page. Well, the front of the lifestyle section, which is kind of funny. But that was in the late 1980s, essentially. Kind of before there was a big pop culture stigma put on Tourette's. Or at least before I was conscious of it. Before it became a silly comedy routine or a caricature that ended up becoming the definition as far as most people were concerned. Something to make fun of, and subsequently, for me, something to hide from. I became aware of that stigma in my vulnerable teenage years, which definitely affected the kind of adult I became. I'm now 37, and I'm all right. I turned out all right, I guess. But I just made it my policy to not tell people for fear that they would reduce me, or act uncomfortable around me, or just adopt a totally inaccurate impression of me. And in one sense, that's kind of how society has been conditioned. By even the serious, non-comedy portrayals of Tourette's, like documentaries or talk shows that aired in the 1990s that portrayed it as something either super depressing or totally paralyzing, despite the fact that even the worst cases were in people who were massively intelligent and creative and able to do a lot that other people couldn't. But in my context, boy did I develop a sensitivity to what people might assume about me because of how Tourette's was set up for the world. So yeah, my big secret. The only exceptions are just a small few people I've told. People who are closest to me, or people who I thought would get it. Probably count them on one hand. Most of my regular day-to-day friends, I don't know, I assume they've noticed my tics, but probably not to the point where they've diagnosed me. Plus, I've gotten kind of good at blending my tics in. Like, I'll do a fake throat clearing to go with a vocal tic that on its own might sound kind of weird. Just to camouflage it a bit, like in slapstick cops and robbers movies, where the bad guy running through the park freezes in place with a tree branch in front of his face as the police walk by, just so he looks like part of the background. In the grand scheme, my tics, as much as they dominate me, and sometimes really, really bother me, there's a certain few tics I have that really get to me, but overall my Tourette's on the grand spectrum is maybe sort of in the middle, what some people might call mild. Like a lot of people with Tourette's. Who, it turns out, have either taken the exact same path in life as me, of hiding it away, or a totally different one, where they've owned it, proudly informed the people around them about what they deal with, what Tourette's is, just to get it out there, get it out of the way. And I know these stories because for the past couple months, I've been having on-the-record conversations. You might call them interviews, but I call them conversations, with other people who have Tourette's, which followed the realization that, hey, I'm an adult, I don't know anybody else with Tourette's. I just hadn't thought for some reason that actually having a sense of community would not only benefit me in general, but could benefit other people who were either in the same boat or chose a different way of living with Tourette Syndrome, which is so interesting to me. The decisions that other people have made while being conscious or hyperconscious of their Tourette's. You know, how they managed it, what their tics are. Are they similar to my tics? What do they look like? What do they sound like? Are they quote-unquote open about it with other people? Do their coworkers know? How'd they reveal it to their significant others? What did they say? Was it ever a big deal? And on and on. So what are these stories? That's this podcast. Each week, we're going to have a really good raw conversation with someone who has Tourette's. And gotta say, so far, it's crazy how many bizarre similarities have come up along the way with myself and certain people. Tics, experiences, whatever. It's been such an interesting endeavor. There's even this one really odd tic that I have. I think it's odd. That Maddie, the girl we interview in our first episode, and just to explain, this is episode 0 that you're listening to right now. Maddie is episode 1. But anyway, through the course of talking, we discovered that we had the same weird tic. And we both thought nobody else had it. So it's really neat to find these common points. These conversations began after I set up a Twitter profile, @TourettesPod. And I just started putting out hashtags and follows that led me to a number of people willing to talk with me. Which on its own is huge, because I'm a total stranger. These people had no reason to trust me. So it's only fair that I use this episode to open up about my background, just so you know who I am. And ideally, you'll hear some things that you personally will connect with if you have Tourette's. And maybe more importantly, even if you don't have Tourette's. I mean, there's nothing alien about people with Tourette's, even as I've kind of alienated myself. But while kind of looking at my past for this episode and talking with people about it, there's a lot that came up that I just didn't know. So we're about to talk to a couple people who can explain.
Hi, Ben.
Who are you and who are you in relation to me?
I'm your mother.
And your name? Your first name?
Pam.
All right, so meet my mom. She's a huge part of the story. Actually, her part is a lot bigger than I previously knew. But it's also important to hear a mother's thought and discovery process when she notices that her child is acting differently. I don't have kids of my own, but this just seems like something a parent might want to hear.
Well, really, right when you were first born, you just didn't sleep. You didn't like to sleep, and you were very dependent on something from the outside stimulating you. You needed to be focused on a toy or a ball or me or someone talking directly to you or looking directly to you. And if you weren't, you seemed very, like you turned lonely and isolated if you didn't have something to focus directly on and interact with.
I was putting up some window shades.
This is my dad, Terry. Obviously, another huge part of the story.
And the screws and the hardware from the window shades came in a plastic enclosure. It was like 2 cups, and one cup was a little bit smaller in diameter, and it would slide into the other cup. And that's where all the screws and the hardware were. Mm-hmm. You were totally fascinated by that and went on a trip, and you grabbed those cups and held on to them when you're in the car seat, and probably no exaggeration, for about an hour, you would study those cups and put the smaller cup into the larger cup. Look at it, pull it out, put it back in, pull it out. I mean, and all the time kind of rolling the cups over and seeing how they looked when they were together, how they looked when they were apart. I thought, man, that's the cheapest toy that I'd ever come up with.
So I guess you could say this sounds like normal, curious kid stuff.
And I can remember it was very hard for you to sleep, very hard for you to settle down. And it got a little more complex, though, when you started going to pre-K. You could not settle down there.
So, okay, hyperactivity.
And I didn't, since I didn't have any other babies, I didn't have anyone to compare your behavior to see if that was unusual or not. Mm-hmm. But it seemed like it must have been, because I didn't see other people's kids with that same trouble.
Right.
And so, it was kind of exhausting always, having to stimulate you. But you were, as long as you were being stimulated, you were very, very happy and obviously very intelligent and smart, and you liked people, and you were friendly and good-hearted and all that. But it was always a struggle to keep you happy by way of stimulating you with something, from the outside that was, and not only just an object. It seemed that it had to be an object combined with a person. Someone had to be either looking at you or playing with you with a toy or something. And when it was a challenge, because it was hard to know, whether or not I was helping or hurting by indulging all of that. And then by the time Lauren was born,
my sister,
her needs were so obviously different that then I started thinking, well, maybe something is up.
Right.
Or something's up with Lauren, because, I could easily ignore Lauren to tend to you, and she didn't seem to mind being alone. I ignored her a lot. And then when Kieran was born,
my other sister, we're all just 2 years apart from each other.
Her personality was almost a combination. She didn't have the needs for stimulation that you did, but she also had you and Lauren to reflect off of. So it was still hard to analyze and tell what's going on.
So they tried putting a violin in front of me just to see if that would take.
So you started violin lessons, I guess, when you were about 4.5 or so.
Right.
And the great thing about that was the instrument provided the object for you to look at. And then the music provided, a musical stimulation as well. So it wound up being a very, very good thing for you to do. Take violin. You had a project, you had practicing, you had the music, you enjoyed the progress of it. Plus, it provided, a great, source of focus for you. And plus, I could, do it with you, because I could, once we got a piano, I could play the piano with you and all that. Well, then...
and real quick about the violin thing, because it seems like I liked it when I was getting somewhere, but I felt like the discipline part of it and taking lessons wasn't really something I was good at or anything for me, which I think, like once I finally picked up guitar later on and just was basically self-taught, I think it was the right combination of having something, in front of me, something to use and something to express myself with, but also kind of doing it in a way that was sort of outside of the standard training that just happened to work for me.
Well, you didn't like the structure of it, that's for sure, and the pressure to practice and all that, because you found it difficult to settle into a routine. As hard as I tried to create routine for you, you really found it difficult to stick to it. Plus, if I found that you were kind of stuck in a place where you wanted to stay for a while, I was hesitant to interrupt you. And, so I kind of let you make your own structure, which wasn't much structure.
But with all this, around this time, the revelation came, she said.
When you started kindergarten, which was very shortly after you started violin, it was approximately at the same time. It seemed like you were adapting okay to school, but then you started, when you came home, I started noticing that you had these vocal expressive tics. And in addition to that, you had an eye blinking thing where your eyes would you'd kind of look straight up and your eyes would blink.
I do remember that initially you did have, before the vocal tics set in, you did have seems like there were certain head movements and maybe some movements with your eyebrows. And then, though, when you started doing something like that, I thought you were maybe imitating Spock on Star Trek, or trying to be cute.
Raising the eyebrow.
Kind of raising the eyebrow, and then kind of a tilt of the head or something. You were doing at one point. And again, you just don't know. But then the vocal tics started emerging, and quite frankly, at first, I thought you were doing those on purpose, because sometimes you would be doing something that would get you into trouble. And I think that was a tense situation where the vocal tics would get worse and it almost appeared you were trying to egg on the situation just a little bit. But it sure didn't take long before we figured out that no, you weren't doing that. That was a real thing that you really did not have a lot of control in.
And so I talked to Uncle Sean about it, and he said that I probably needed to get right straight to a neurologist just in case they were little seizures.
I was thinking of asking Little Caesars to sponsor this episode. Just kidding. Okay.
So, so that's what I did. So I made an appointment with a neurologist, and he felt like since I'd never heard of Tourette syndrome, and he didn't mention it at first, but he said there were a whole lot of things that something like that could be indicative of that he needed to rule out, including diabetes and epilepsy and a number of other things that had, medical tests. And once all of those turned out negative, he sat me down and he said, "Have you ever heard of Tourette syndrome?" And I said, "No." And I really didn't pay much mind. I thought, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about, so he's just going to throw some term at me. So he said, "Have you ever heard of Tourette syndrome?" He said, "I think that's what he has. And, there's a lot of literature. You need to get educated on it." He said, "There are medicines that we can treat the symptoms with, and I'd like to try a little bit." He said, "But, you need to get educated on this." So coincidentally, the very same week, there was an article in the newspaper in Ann Landers where somebody wrote in and described, I may have saved it, wrote in and described her child's behavior and that she was at her wit's end. And Ann Landers said she had run that question by someone in the medical school at Indiana University or someplace near where she lived, and the term Tourette syndrome came up. So I said, I said, well, gee, maybe there is something to this. This is twice in 1 week I've heard this term.
Yeah.
And then your violin teacher, Lorraine Westermark, called me on the phone that night. She said, "Did you read the paper today?" And I said, yes. And I said, he's seeing a neurologist and, whatever it is, we'll get to the bottom of it. But thank you for calling and all this kind of stuff. So, of course, the more we pursued it, the more I knew that was probably what it was. And that the neurologist said that there's really nothing medical other than this little bit of medicine that we can try. Mm-hmm. But because there are so many manifestations of behavior and, interaction in school, you really need a psychiatrist.
The doctor visits came, and at that point in time, the big thing was, though, what medication is used to control Tourette's. It was basically experimental, is my recollection.
Your therapy was just interplay with him to kind of, so he could monitor how you acted competitively, like playing games or just talking about your life. But what my job was to create as much routine and as much behavior modification as I could, like rewards for, for positive reinforcement for things. And
did that work?
No, it really didn't.
So medication.
And what the action of the medicine was to kind of awaken the part of the brain that managed control and routine and self-control. And there was a theory that part of the brain just didn't work very well, and that this medicine was to stimulate that area of the brain.
Yeah.
And if you had to use a combo of drugs, of medicines, and it was unsure as to what combo would work and how much of one and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And you went through a lot of stuff. And, of course, some of the meds, though, affected you mentally because it was causing your body to deform in certain ways.
First medication I was on was clonidine, and then Haldol, or haloperidol. And so while we have more for this episode, I'll go ahead and skip to the end regarding medications. They didn't really go over well with me, including one particular medication that starts with an A that actually kind of deformed me a little bit, and it was more bad than good, we'll say.
Yeah, you took some pretty, heavy hitting drugs that were, that were not helpful and had bad side effects.
So the other memory I have, and maybe I was like 12 or something, maybe younger, 10, 11, 12, where we went to UNC Hospital, I think, and spent like,
Yeah.
I thought it was a couple days. And I remember them taking a whole bunch of blood from me, so much that one of my veins collapsed, and I had to drink this stuff called glucola to kind of bring me back to life.
No, the glucola, that was part of the test.
Yeah. So just how my body, processed stuff like that, or?
Yes, it was a very high dose of sugar to see, if you had an insulin reaction or any kind of, activity of your organs that would respond to the high dose of glucola.
And what was the point of going there? Was it just to see if like a new kind of medication or a different kind of study or a different kind of evaluation worked on me, or?
Yeah, it was another opinion that was most closer to the academics of what was going on in the research of Tourette syndrome.
I think this was around 1992. Yeah,
and other syndromes of the same type.
Did that lead to a different kind of medication?
No, we tried something else, but no, there was no. They provided group therapy for the parents, and the kids could go play in a different room and everything. Mm-hmm. But no, that wasn't there. There was really no help ever medically for that.
Well, my one specific memory of being at UNC, besides getting blood drawn all the time, was sitting in a room, and there was I don't remember her name. It was another doctor, and she would give me tests, and she would make me sort of like, give me some A, B, C, D, like what comes next in this sequence, sort of patterns. Test like that. And I remember being in the room, and there was a big mirror on the wall, and when she left, and I felt like it was maybe 20 minutes that passed, and I don't think I realized at the time that they were probably just looking at me to see what I did to pass the time.
Oh, wow. I didn't know this.
But I remember looking at the two-way mirror, and if you look close enough, you can see on the other side, and I remember seeing other people looking at me, including her.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's my one standout memory from that.
Interesting. I don't remember. Didn't know that.
Made the decision later to just go ahead and just see if I could go without medication. That's jumping way ahead. But one part about my childhood that really was therapeutic and really helpful was when my mom got active with the Tourette Association, which at the time was called the Tourette Syndrome Association.
So, and then, of course, I joined the Tourette Syndrome Association. We went to some of those meetings, or I went to some of the meetings. I think I brought you to one. And
we went to conferences. There's one in D.C., I remember. There's one in Austin, Texas. There was a third one, and I'm blanking on where it might have been. It was another big city. Atlanta, maybe? I mean, another fairly large city.
Yeah, I went to one in Atlanta, but the one in Washington, I went twice to that one at the McLean Hilton.
Yeah.
I went twice to that one, and the one in Houston was in between that one.
Houston.
And then I think I did go to one in Atlanta, too. Mm-hmm. And then we had a couple of local meetings, and I eventually was named the chapter president.
And so it was during this time that I met other kids my age who had Tourette's. It's really, really important experience to normalize the whole thing for me and set some context. Plus, I got to meet some big names in the world of Tourette's through these Tourette Association conferences, like professional baseball player Jim Eisenreich, who autographed a baseball for me. He was with the Kansas City Royals at the time, later with the Twins and the Phillies, and Steve Bachner and Shane Festel, people like that who were fully grown adults at this time, and I'm guessing knew what it was like being a kid without a world of understanding about Tourette's and how it fits in with the world. So they all definitely took the time to talk to me, especially Shane Festel, who just look him up. I get a little choked up thinking about him because he knew what I was going through. And when I was a kid, and he might not remember a moment of that, but he probably talked to a million people, but just having that and just him kind of kneeling down and talking to me, it meant a lot. All right, didn't mean to make it awkward. on with the show.
Well, one of the good things about those, meetings was, you would hear other people's stories, and it really was incredible to hear, how similar some people's, stories were. I mean, it was like, wow, it was like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You come together with 1,000 people, and people get up and give their little testimonials, and everyone's got the same story.
So this next part was totally news to me. Maybe it shouldn't have been, but it was, about recognition of Tourette's and insurance and access to care.
Well, see, one of my reasons for getting, very active in the association was to get insurance. This is the reason I went into medical record science, was because the insurance industry did not recognize Tourette's as a major medical problem, and so did not cover any of the treatment or therapies. And, I just thought that was completely unfair. And
how long was it before? When they actually, when did the gears turn on that?
It did happen. I think by the time you were about maybe 12, it was recognized as a medical condition that was covered, as a medical condition, not a psychological condition, but a medical condition.
Pretty late in the game.
Yeah. I did, I testified before a subcommittee on health and insurance matters in Congress. And I was actually supposed to testify before the U.S. Senate, but Desert Storm happened that day, and they canceled the panel.
Wow.
After that, it all just kind of happened on its own. But we worked at these meetings on how to present the case and say, this isn't their fault. Look at these kids. They haven't done anything wrong. This isn't their fault. Why are you punishing them? That was going at it from that angle. And I did a lot of letter writing and a lot of talking to people. But it all, the politics of the country changed at the time. And then eventually it all worked out.
So I wasn't aware of any of that stuff. Thinking back to when I was a kid, again, I didn't even know to any great degree that Tourette's was such a misunderstood or misportrayed thing. What gave me a clue was when the newspaper came over to write something about me having Tourette's. A reporter had gotten some kind of list of people involved with the Tourette Association and tracked us down to write an awareness story. So this was 1990, just a few months before my 10th birthday. And for the photo shoot that accompanied the story, I remember the photographer, who was very nice. The reporter and the photographer were both very nice, and the reporter actually did a really good job with the story. But I remember going outside to the driveway to play some basketball with my dad, and that was going to be the photo shoot. And the photographer setting up the picture by basically telling my dad to sort of show me how to shoot the basketball. I was 9. I play basketball all the time. It's not like I didn't know. But it was maybe the first time I can remember understanding that there was a view on Tourette's as something else. So not blaming the photographer or anything like that. But when the portrayals of Tourette's and the sort of comedy that was at the expense of Tourette's, when all that stuff picked up, that's when I kind of jumped into the decisions I made about hiding from it and everything we talked about at the beginning of this episode. All in all, I think I've done okay. I love my job. I love where I live. I'm at a good place in life, happy. I don't know what my life would have been like had I owned Tourette's and just kind of championed it and been vocal about it and carried the banner of awareness. So if people didn't get Tourette's, maybe they would at least get me. I don't know. But in the episodes ahead, you're going to hear from a lot of people and how they've managed Tourette's in their life and being misunderstood or not being misunderstood, not letting people get away with misunderstanding them. These are really, really cool stories, and every single episode has a really strong takeaway. And one of the details we discuss, not every single episode, but one of the details has to do with relationships. If I'm interviewing somebody with a husband or a wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, what was the first conversation like about having Tourette's, or did you discover it together, or how did it come up? What'd you say? What did they say? That sort of thing. This sounds kind of weird talking about it, but there always seems to be a story in that. What's the first time you picked up on something that you thought was odd that ended up being explainable by what I later told you?
I know something that was odd is when we met, And we spent all night talking. You didn't ask for my number. That, to me, that was the first time I knew he's weird.
This is my ridiculous better half, Ambrose.
Okay, so how about in the context of like something that
All
might
right,
constitute
I know what this is
a
about.
tick or...
Let me do it. Okay.
Okay, you're on.
You used to come over to my place when we first started dating. And we would watch a movie every night, drink milkshakes. You know, my head was on your chest and we were watching a movie. And then you did something vocally repetitive.
What? Like what? Like what was I doing?
It was like this.
Yeah. I'll still do that one.
I know. That's my favorite one. No, but listen, when I think back to that moment, I'm viewing it as I just remember that my eyes got really wide, like saucer-like. And the first thought I had was like, oh my God, he's like weird. I can't like him. Like, I don't know. Because I've dated weird guys before.
Yeah.
It's always
And here
something
comes another
sneaky.
one. Yeah.
And so that was my initial like 0.5 second thought. And then you kept doing it and I thought, oh, it's just a thing. It's just a tick. And then I knew you had Tourette's and then I was like, okay, I can deal with this.
So you knew in your mind, like, I mean, like Tourette's, like the actual like diagnosis popped in your mind as something I might have. So, I mean, were you just kind of waiting on me to tell you, or, I mean, were you going to bring it up to me and ask, what are you doing? Like, what happened?
Honestly, I don't remember.
I do. I remember we were just talking. I forget what the segue was into.
Was it that night?
But no, it wasn't that same. Well, I'm not sure exactly what night you're talking about, but I do remember, I think we were just like, you know, it's like, okay, tell me something about yourself, you know, that sort of thing. And then I brought it up and you didn't seem all that shocked. And you're just kind of like gave me this look like, yeah, that makes sense.
Well, I like the vocal tick, the one I first noticed, because I don't know, it's cute. And also I noticed, you know, being with you for 7 years now, when you do it, you know, it correlates to, or it's in direct response to something that you're seeing or reading or hearing. And so,
yeah,
you know, so it's like in fast succession. So it's
yeah. And you think I'm doing that because I'm stimulated by something in front of me that I'm reading or taking in?
I mean, you'll do it randomly, like a vocal tick, but you'll do it in faster succession while you're stimulated by something.
Yeah.
Or because you're stimulated by something. But my favorite, besides that one, is your eye tick.
What's my eye tick? Explain it.
It's when your eyes, you know, you're looking at someone, but then for like half a second, your eyes get wide.
So I kind of like just like lift my eyelids or just kind of widen my eyes like I see something amazing or something.
Yeah, and it makes me feel good.
Well, what do you think other people think when they see me do that?
I don't know if other people notice you doing it, but, you know, I find that a lot of people are really on autopilot. They don't notice shit.
All right, so she's the only one to use a swear word here, and punctuating a pretty good point. But that brings us back to the beginning of this episode, and people just kind of understanding Tourette's as nothing more than the swearing disease. Yeah, there is a small percentage of people, less than 10% if that's right, that have what's called coprolalia, this involuntary use of words that people tend to consider obscene. Small percentage, and those people are pretty heroic for pushing through and living their lives despite what pop culture, and I guess you could say everyday people, tend to do with that information. It's been ridiculed in a completely unfair way, and I challenge anyone who makes fun of it to try to live with even a mild case of Tourette's. When I wrap up work and I get into my car, that is just a crazy release of tics for me. You can't bottle it up, it's not going away. Suppression is really difficult, so I have these moments of release. But getting back to the point, check this out. This guy?
Isn't that disease where you curse?
From the beginning of the episode, I totally walked him into that answer. And that shouldn't be a disappointment because we had talked. He actually came up to me while I was interviewing people on the street, and he just asked me what I was doing. And I told him about this podcast, that I had Tourette's. I told him what my tics were and how everyone always thinks it's this other thing and how I've been kind of, hiding from it. So when I asked him what Tourette's was, he knew how to play along. But that was such an awesome way to cap off this man on the street thing that I was doing. I went out there in a busy downtown, assuming that everyone I asked about Tourette's would say, "Oh, that's the swearing disease, right?" Because that's what I've always heard people say. I'm sure that's what you've always heard people say. And yeah, people do still think that. Last time I heard that was maybe, I don't know, like 6 months ago. But I talked to a good number of people, and they said they either didn't know what Tourette's was, or they gave a pretty good answer. Good enough.
Tourette's is, or Tourette Syndrome?
I've seen it like on the MTV show before. I know that some people, do suffer with it. I don't really know a lot on it, but I have, seen it on TV and stuff. And can it be like hereditary sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Everyone is still perfect, the same. Like everybody's still excellent, but you can definitely, you don't got Tourette's. You're a nice guy.
Just, I guess like a neurological tick that makes sometimes like verbal tics or sometimes even like physical tics that people just can't control.
I know a lot about everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you work with kids who have Tourette's?
Yeah, I have a couple in my classes that do. So.
Just a neurological disease, is that correct?
With the jerking.
Okay. That's
I have a friend who had them.
really,
Yeah.
really.
At times, randomly, just kind of blurt out a cuss word or something like that, but he never really meant anything or nothing actually startled him. It was just something randomly came up.
Syndrome.
The people that twitch, maybe? Yeah, I feel sorry for them, but...
Yeah. Thank you.
I think it's like where people involuntarily have twitches. And twitches come in a lot of different forms.
I think it's an uncontrollable outburst of different words.
Uncontrollable movements and speaking.
Okay, so that was just a few of them, and not bad. I mean, at least nobody jumped on the whole saw it on South Park swearing disease thing. But check this out. The very first person I talked with, the first person I went up to.
I have Tourette's.
Really? You're kidding me.
I promise you. When I was younger, I guess they tell me I slap my knees.
Yeah.
And still I have some nervous tics, but I once I played sports, then I was able to control it. I guess I got my energy out on the weekends.
Yeah.
So we talked for a few. We talked about the stigma. We talked about, whether we were sort of closeted, or he said he was kind of the same way, but it also didn't really bother him as much as apparently my Tourette's had bothered me in my life. But just really, really cool to just randomly, especially the first person I went up to talk to, is somebody who can directly relate. So this podcast, I got to say, I didn't know what kind of response I would get to it. I thought, just kind of going at it cold on Twitter, just saying, hey, I'm starting a podcast about Tourette's. Let me know if you want to talk. I thought, maybe I would get 5 people and then that would be it. But it's really been a floodgate. It's been kind of overwhelming. And I'm going to say that's a really good thing. There's definitely some work that's going to be put into this. It's going to be a bit time consuming because I don't want to squander this opportunity. I'm really, really encouraged by the response. So I'm going to wrap up this episode so you can get on to episode 1. I promise you're going to have a good time with it. You're going to find stuff to relate to. You're going to hear really funny coincidences. And it's just a good, raw conversation, and the kind that I just never get to have. And I didn't cover everything about myself. I mean, this is not a vanity podcast. It's not about me. It's just I wanted you to kind of know my background and where I'm coming from as the quote-unquote host of the Tourette's podcast. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. A couple of other pieces about my background. I'm a former journalist, newspaper guy. I did radio for a while. I do podcasting professionally in sort of other respects as part of my day job. I sort of work in the space of government affairs and public affairs, PR, that sort of thing. And I have a musical background. I played in bands. We toured all over the country. That comes up in later episodes with some additional detail. But if you got any questions, you can tweet at me at Tourette'sPod. If you're not on Twitter, you can get up with me via email. The address is tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Please keep in touch. Feel free to send criticisms, critiques, thoughts, anything like that. Or just say hi. Okay, so enjoy the episodes ahead. I'll be in touch. This is Ben.